Chapter 2. Black Moon. Lyndon tried to watch everything as the Drummond slipped backwards from the levee, then turned towards open water. Shifting from side to side, she saw the giants unfurling canvas as if the labor were done by incantation rather than effort. Under her feet the deck began to roll, but the seas were light, and the giant ship's great weight made it stable. She felt no discomfort. Her gaze repeatedly intersected Covenant's, and his excitement heightened hers. His expression was free of darkness. Even his beard seemed to bristle with possibilities. After a moment, she became aware that he was breathing words along the breeze. Stone and sea are deep in life, two unalterable symbols of the world. Permanence at rest and permanence in motion, participants in the power that remains. They resonated in her memory like an act of homage. When she changed positions to look towards Corkery, the breeze caught her hair, fluttering it across her face. She ran her fingers into her wheaten tresses, held them in place, and that simple gesture gave her more pleasure in herself than she had felt for a long time. Salt tinged the air, sharpening the very sunlight so that the Greve looked like a place of rebirth as it proceeded. She began to think that perhaps more things had been reborn than she would have dared to hope. Then Pitchwife began to sing. He stood some distance away, but his voice carried light across the Drummond, singing strongly from his deformed chest over the slapping waves of the snap of the canvas. His tune was a plain song, spiced with accents and suggestions of harmony, and the other giants joined him. Come, sea and wave, broad footpath of those who roam, and gateway to the world. All ways lead the way to home. Come, wind and speed, sky breath and life of sail. Lines and sheets unfurled, our hearts covet every gale. Come, travel and quest, discovery of the earth. Mysteries unknurled, roaming without stint or dearth. Risk and journey save, the heart of life from loss and need. We are the ocean's guest, and we love the vasty world. The giants were joyful singers, and their voices formed a counterpoint to the rocking of the masts, a song punctuated by a rising staccato as the breeze knocked the canvas. Starfare's gem appeared to ride music as well as wind. As the wind stiffened, Corkery slid towards the horizon with surprising clarity, while the sun rose into midday. Honensgrave and his crew exchanged comments and jests as if they were all negligent, but his eyes under the bulwark of his brows missed nothing. At his orders, the rest of the sails had been raised, and Starfare's gem strode into the sunburnt sea with a fleetness that fulfilled the prophecy of its more marked sides. Lyndon could feel the vibrancy running like a thrill through the stone. In the hands of the giants, even granite became a thing of swiftness and graceful poise. Before long, her sensations became so sapid that she could no longer remain still. Instinctively, she moved away and began exploring the ship. At once, Cale was at her shoulder. As she crossed the foredeck, he surprised her by asking if she wanted to see her quarters. She stopped to stare at him. The impassive wall of his mien gave no hint of how he had come by enough knowledge of the Drummond to make such an offer. His short tunic left his brown limbs always free and ready, but his question made him appear not only prepared, but also prescient. However, he answered her mute inquiry by explaining that Seer and Hergrim had already spoken to the store's master and obtained her at least a skeletal understanding of the ship. For a moment, Lyndon paused to consider the continuing providence of the Haruchai. But then she realized that Cale had offered her exactly what she did want. A place of her own, privacy in which to accustom herself to the sensations of the giant ship. A change to clarify the new things that were happening to her. And perhaps the hospitality of giants would extend as far as bathwater. Hot bathwater? Images of luxuriance filled her head. How long had it been since she had last taken a hot bath? Since she had felt genuinely clean? She nodded to Cale and followed him towards the stern of the Drummond. Amidship stood a flat-roofed structure that separated the fore and after decks, and the fore and after decks, completely spanning the vessel from side to side. When Cale led her into the housing through a sea door and with a storm sill as high as her knees, she found herself in a long eating hall with a galley on one side and a warren of storage lockers on the other. The structure had no windows, but lanterns made it bright and cheery. Their light gleamed on the stone of the mid-mast as it passed straight through the hull like a roof tree. The shaft was carved like a hatchment, with patterns at which she was tempted to look more closely. But Cale moved through the hull as if he already knew its secrets, and she went with him out to the afterdeck. Together, they crossed the giant ship's stern. She acknowledged Honinsgrave's salute from the wheel deck, then followed Cale through another sea door to starboard, below the master's position. That entrance gave access to a smooth stone ladder leading downward. The ladder had been formed for giants, but she was able to use it, and she only had to descend one level. There, in a passageway lit by more lanterns, she found a series of doors, rooms, Cale explained, which had been set aside for her, Vane, Seer, and himself. Covenant, Bryn, and Hergram were to be similarly housed on the port side of the vessel. When she entered her cabin, she discovered that it was a chamber which would have been small for a giant, but seemed wastefully large for her. A long hammock hung on near one wall. 2 massive chairs and a table occupied most of the floor. These furnishings outsized her. The chair seats reached to her waist, and she would have to stand on the table to gain the hammock. But for the present, those difficulties did not bother her. The chamber was bright with sunshine reflecting through an open port, and it offered privacy. She was glad to have it. But moments after Cale left in search of the food and bathwater she requested of him, a tension which had been nagging at her underneath her excitement demanded her notice. The withdrawal of Cale's hard Haruchai presence pulled aside a veil within her. A hand of darkness hidden somewhere inside the depths of the Drummond, reached out one dire finger toward her heart. At its touch, all her relief and anticipation and newness eroded away and fell down like a sea-doused castle of sand. An old and half-forgotten black mood began to seep back into her. It stank of her parents and Gibbon. After all, what had truly changed for her? What right or reason did she have to be where she was? She was still the same, a woman driven by the need to flee death rather than to pursue life. She did not know how to change. And after the Namorum had explicitly denied her hope, and the Namorum had explicitly denied her hope. He said, "You are being forged as iron is forged to achieve the ruin of the earth. Because you are open to that which no other in the land can discern, you are open to be forged." She would never be free of his eager cruelty, or the gelid ill at which he had desecrated her private flesh, or of how she had responded. The message of his doom came to her now, rising as it grew from the keel of Starfare's gem, as if the health of the Drummond contained a canker spot which fed on the giants in their ship. The blackness had contorted much of her life. It was her parents, her father, and her mother, and it was here, it was within her, and yet she inhaled it as if the air were full of it as well. A fate she could neither name nor endure seemed to lurk in ambush for her, so that her cabin felt more like a cell in the hold of Revelstone than a sun-washed chamber in the company of giants. For several long moments she fought the oppression, struggled to define the strange way it appeared to spring from outside her. But her past was too strong. It blinded her percipience. Long before Cale could return, she fled her cabin, rushed back up to the open air. Clinging to the starboard rail with hands that trembled, she swallowed repeatedly, heavily, at the old dread rising in her, like a recognition of Gibbon's touch. But gradually, the darkness lessened. She could think of no reason why this should be true, but she instinctively felt that she had put some distance between herself and the source of the mood. Sinking to increase that distance, she turned towards the nearest stairway to the wheel deck. Seer appeared at her side to ward her while Kale was away. She could hardly refrain from leaning against him, bracing her frailty on his rectitude, but she hated that weakness. Striving to ignore it, to deny it, she impelled herself up the stairs alone. On the wheel deck she found Hanan's grave, the first, Covenant, Bryn, and another giant who held the great wheel which guided the ship. This wheel was formed of stone and stood half again as tall as Linden. But the steerswoman turned its spokes as lightly as if it had been carved of balsa wood. Hanan's grave greeted the chosen, and the first gave her a nod of welcome. Yet Linden felt immediately as if she had interrupted a discussion. Covenant looked towards her as if he meant to ask her opinion. But then he closed his mouth and gazed at her more intently. Before she could speak, he said, "Linden, what's the matter?" She frowned back at him, vexed and shamed by the transparency of her emotions. Clearly, she had not changed in any way that mattered. She could still not tell him the truth, not here, not under an open sky with the eyes of the giants. She tried to dismiss his question with a shrug, smooth out the lines of her face, but his attention did not lose its acuity. In a careful voice, she said, "I was thinking about Gibbon." With her eyes, she asked him to let the matter pass. "I'd rather think about something else." At that, his stare softened. He looked like a man who was willing to do almost anything for her. Clearing his throat, he said, "We were talking about Vane. He hasn't moved since he came aboard, and he's in the way, interferes with some of the rigging. The crew asked him to move, but you know how much good that did." She knew. Time and time again she had seen the demon dim spawn in his familiar, relaxed stance, arms slightly bent, eyes focused on nothing, as motionless as an obelisk. So they tried to shift him. 3 of them. He didn't budge. Covenant shook his head at the idea that anyone could be heavy or strong enough to defeat 3 giants. Then he concluded, "We were trying to decide what to do about it. Hanan's grave wants to use a block and tackle." Linden gave an inward sigh of relief. The darkness retreated another step, pushed back by this chance to be of use. "It won't do any good," she replied. Vane's purposes were a mystery to her, but she had seen deeply enough into him that he could become denser and less tractable than the granite of the ship. If he doesn't want to move, he won't move. Covenant nodded as if she had confirmed his expectations. The first muttered sourly to herself. With a shrug, Hanan's grave ordered his crew to work around the demon den spawn. Linden was glad of their company. Her sense of oppression was definitely weaker now. The huge health of the giant seemed to shield her, and Covenant's considerateness eased her. She could breathe as if her lungs were not clogged with memories of death. Moving to the taffrail, she sat down against one of the posts and tried to tune herself to the giant ship. Shortly, Cale came to take Seer's place. His features betrayed no reproach for the wasted errand on which she had sent him. For that forbearance she was also grateful.